I'm so psyched for tonight's discussion because the widening gap between the have and have-nots is really the issue of our time, right? And it's our contention at The Citizen that the antidote lies in sustaining long-term inclusive growth. And if you were here for our event with Richard Vague and his book on the history of business, you heard how throughout history, real estate investment has been the driver of economic growth since the country's founding, both for good and for ill. So let me welcome our panelists by name and title, and then we'll start to mix it up. To my far left, and it's the only time he'll be to my left during this discussion, Matt Pestronk, president and co-founder of the aforementioned Post Brothers. Next to him, A. Bruce Crawley, president and principal owner of Millennial 3 Management, Inc., a full-service marketing and communications firm. Charles Lomax, chairman and CEO of Lomax Real Estate Partners and treasurer of Philadelphia's Accelerator Fund, and Laura Slutsky, executive director of the Urban Land Institute. Welcome, guys. Let's hear it for them. Yeah. So let's begin with a case study in what we're talking about. Matt, you and Bruce really together decided to do something with your West Poplar project that it was really groundbreaking. I first read about it when Inga Saffron wrote about it in the Inquirer, and then you and I talked about it a number of times, and we covered it in The Citizen. Can you walk us through what the idea was and what the genesis of the idea was for this experiment in workforce development?
Sure. Thanks, Larry. So the initiative that Bruce and I and others undertook was basically, it had a name, it has a name, and it is a formal undertaking, and it's ongoing, but just what we were looking to do when we began to consider developing a building at 9th and Poplar was bring people from the neighborhood who had not had an opportunity to join the construction industry through a path to becoming a skilled apprentice, meaning they could work as a specialized electrician or carpenter or plumber, what have you, from the immediate neighborhood, likely out of unemployment, into a job that was a pathway to the middle class. And as a developer, we were in a position to demand, we're a unique developer in that we're also a general contractor. We were in a position to impose on our subcontractors the requirement that we help them identify candidates and support these candidates through an apprenticeship certification program that they had. We were looking to hire as many people as we could from the immediate neighborhood, and recruit the people for the jobs, get them trained, and get them hired. Sounds simple. It was difficult, but it was simple.
Well, and along those lines, how did this come about? Bruce, how did you prevail upon Matt to undertake? And I believe you committed to 10% of your workforce being from the immediate area. What's the genesis of this?
Well, the genesis actually traces back.
If you could talk more into the mic there.
The genesis actually traces back to an organization called RANG. That's an acronym for Richard Allen New Generation. And I and several people who were born and raised in the Richard Allen housing projects started to get concerned about displacement. We weren't anti-development. Development is a good thing as long as people don't have to leave their community against their will. And so we started looking at ways we could do that. We formed the community organization in about 2016. And then in 2017, after talking to some people in city government, they told us about a thing called an RCO. We had no idea what an RCO was. We were a community organization. We were giving out Christmas gifts to.
But that is what a
neighborhoods and
community organization
that
is.
kind of thing. So when we found out what an RCO was a thing that happens as an offshoot of the Planning Commission, and community groups can be designated an RCO if they decide which footprint in the city they want to focus on. And that RCO would thereby have an opportunity to have a say in how development would happen in their neighborhood. And that's all tied in with city council. And so it was an interesting thing. So we did it, and we formed our RCO, and we found out that there was going to be a developer who was going to be working on a building that was near and dear to our hearts at 9th and Poplar. We knew that deserted warehouse for a long, long time. It's been deserted forever. And I guess the only person who thought it had some hope for development was Matt Strunk and the people at Post Brothers. So when we found out they were there and we were designated the CRO for that area, we went to talk to Matt Strunk and had him come into the community and talk about how we could work together. And you know, it was a little dicey at front, but at the end, you know, Matt. So at the end, we struck a really good relationship, and that relationship included signing what the government wants to call a community benefits agreement. And the community benefits agreement says that the developer would do X, Y, and Z, and the community would get these benefits as a result of the development. And you mentioned the 10% of the workforce. Our people simply wanted to mitigate displacement. You know, we'd never get rid of it in total, but wanted to mitigate it and wanted to be a part of whatever economy was happening in the neighborhood, and they never were. So this is why we got together.
What impressed you about your first meetings with Bruce on this issue? Because the way this is normally done is this happens and you, Mr. Developer, writes a check to the RCO, right? And this seems like a much more holistic relationship was set on, to the point that you're going door to door and trying to offer jobs with benefits to people. So what was it that led to that sort of meeting of the minds?
Well, the first time we met was the first time I met Bruce was in the context of this project. It was well before we actually took title to the building. And Bruce just said, I don't actually remember it being dicey. I don't remember. Maybe you're right. I don't remember. But Bruce said to me quite simply, just what he said. We as community leaders have, stuck with this area, and it's on the edge of gentrification, but gentrification to me, to the members of RANG and to the people who formed it, Richard Allen New Generation, means getting pushed out. And I said, well, look, first, there's no building, no one is living in this building we're building, but I recognize that as land values go up, everyone could be concerned about property taxes going up. That's a thing. I can't do anything about that. What I can do is make sure that people who have the least means to stay, who are, probably, underemployed or unemployed, which we discussed was a problem for young people in that area, we can get them to participate in the economic development by working on construction. And we were, within one conversation immediately aligned on that was the most effective way to try to eliminate inequality that everyone is, seeking to avoid increasing that gap. We want to eliminate the gap and close it. Now, obviously, we as an organization had to pay money to set up the training programs to get the OSHA certifications and all the. I don't remember it as being dicey. I just remember all of that as being a huge, just like Bruce and I would call each other, what all we want to do is get these people jobs, and all there is policies and procedures of different parts of the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and all this nonsense. Like, why? But all we want to do is get them jobs and train people and get them jobs. So it worked because we just had a common goal. It was, and development, development is economic activity. And when you're developing, in a community anywhere as a developer, you control your entire supply chain because you can not do business with someone if they don't want to do what you want to do. Now, there's obviously a lot of nuance with that. If someone doesn't support your hiring goals, it can be challenging. Luckily, we don't do challenging, we just do. And so it just worked. But to us, it was very clear from the beginning we were aligned in that regard.
And one of the things that jumped out at me was that you actually had people going literally door to door and trying to get residents to sign up for training and jobs that with benefits that would be an entry to the middle class.
People are so tired of hearing bullshit about things like this being offered. That was why we had to do that. I mean, Bruce told me we were going to have to do that 3-4 months before we had to do it. I said, I must have come to 6 community meetings and given people my emails and said, please call me. And it didn't have the effect we wanted. So we went and we had to do that. So, we can talk more about that, but that was what we had to do. And that worked.
Well, the advantage is with Matt working with Rang. Most of the people in Rang were either still residents of Richard Allen community. When I say Richard Allen community, I mean the projects themselves in like a 2-block radius around north, south, east, and west is the Richard Allen community. And either they were still there or they had been there years ago and they still had an affinity for the community. And so when we needed to reach people who could come out and learn about and decide whether they wanted to be involved in the construction industry and the development industry, we knew what doors to knock on. And so that's how we cut through the bull, as Matt talks about all the time. But it turned out to be a very natural and normal thing to do, to knock on doors, to call people on the phone, people we went to school with, people that the ladies played jacks with, whatever it was. There was a natural relationship that we were able to turn into an economic opportunity.
And I want to get Laura's perspective on what this says, what this case study says. But before I do that, and Matt, this is now you have plans to do this writ large, right? You have a department inside your empire dedicated to this idea. Is that right?
Leaving the whole empire and to comment alone, it's something we do on every project. Yeah,
that's great. Laura, what are you hearing as expert that you are from a policy standpoint? What does this say? What does this case study say about the possibilities for inclusive growth?
Thank you, Larry. Hi, everyone. This is just a great example of what we're hearing in our organization, where we're talking to developers, nonprofits, community organizations in Philadelphia and around the country wanting to do this exact activity. And it's amazing to see it happen in Philadelphia. And we're seeing folks, developers, there's always a perception of developers, but there's all kinds of developers and many who are nonprofit. Some community development corporations do real estate. So I think it's just such a broad and more varied group that are really seeking to see more than just the bottom line, seeking to see community impacts. And I think a couple of the key pieces of what Matt described is, number one, working with a trusted community leader and organization. And so I don't know whether it's policy or just implementation and finding those trusted relationships. I also used to work in the public sector, and we had a difficult time giving away very cheap money to do development activities that were around affordable housing and, exactly these types of goals. But trying to identify people that actually want to come out and use the programs is a really big challenge for justifiable reasons. So seeing the partnership with a trusted community organization that can call the ladies from Chess, I think is a huge value. And just thinking about all of the places in the supply chain, the time you're interfacing with the community, the way you're designing a project, the uses and the construction pieces is exciting and something where we can see, people in the neighborhood experiencing the benefits of economic development is a great thing, and something that there's even more interest broadly in those outcomes now than 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, this is certainly something that's trending, as we say. Charles, you're part of something I'm also intrigued about and excited by, which is the Accelerator Fund. Talk to us about the need for it and what the goal is.
So the need for it is the lack of capital, and the lack of capital directed towards affordable housing. As we spoke earlier about the wealth disparity in the city, you have a 26 or 27% poverty rate in the city of Philadelphia, and if you look at the history, you'll see that the reason there is such a wide and disparate wealth gap is it was very intentional. It happened hundreds of years ago, and it sort of wash, repeat, whatever, kept it, and it kept sort of, and generation after generation after generation, there's been a disenfranchisement of the African American community, and particularly economic disenfranchisement. So the Accelerator Fund was set up. It's a CDFI that's set up to actually address affordable housing financing in the city.
And the goal is $100 million. I know when
we're raising $100 million. It was seeded by the city, raising $100 million to deploy in different types of financing structures to accelerate and enhance housing development in Black and brown communities.
And this is to finance Black and brown developers?
Developers, projects,
Yeah.
everything. Yeah.
That's great, because one of the ongoing tensions, right, is that the development community is often white, and where many of these developments are occurring are Black and brown communities, and so the Accelerator Fund is in a way a way to ameliorate against that tension.
Yeah. The problem didn't happen. It took a long time for this to get like this, and so it's going to take a long time, and it's going to need to be very intentional to fix it. So the Accelerator Fund is a great step in the right direction, but it is just a tool in a toolbox of financial resources that need to be deployed in a very intentional way to address the issue.
And part of what occurs to me is that the obvious question then is like, well, how come banks aren't funding, making these, and that goes to the first thing that you said, which was that there is this bias baked in, right?
Well, it's a bias, but also, the problem with affordable housing is it's not affordable. It costs so much to build, and it costs, particularly in Philadelphia, it costs a lot to build stuff. And so you have to, I was talking to some folks the other day, and it's almost like, and Matt, you know this, it's like financial whack-a-mole. You solve one thing, you got something else that pops up. And so you need to structure the projects in a way that banks will underwrite them. And then you need to make sure once they've been underwritten, what you're delivering is something that really meets the needs of the community in all levels.
And this is for anyone, why is it so expensive to build affordable housing in Philadelphia? What are the impediments to affordable housing?
So I'm going to go and then, we're in a pandemic, there's supply shortage, so materials just went through the roof. Labor's expensive. the capital available to finance affordable housing is finite. I mean, there's just the need far exceeds the availability of capital to do this kind of thing. So you have to be very, very, very creative in order to address that issue. I mean, you know, go ahead.
I agree. I don't think there's any single one issue. If you'll notice one thing that I didn't talk about, nor did Bruce, we didn't have any public money on our project. I don't think there's anything wrong with, subsidies and, as you said, the problem. Did you say the problem with affordable housing is expensive? Or what did you say?
It's not affordable.
Unaffordable.
It can't be affordable because here, the problem is that the land costs are a nominal part of construction. Even if you get the land for free from the city, which would be wonderful, but you can't always count on that if you're trying to do affordable housing. Construction costs are construction costs. And what it costs to build a building with an elevator, whether it's got floors like this or linoleum floors, it's like a 3% difference. So when you're talking about targeting 40% of AMI, households, there is no amount of money that can solve that. You make the same return building that as you buying a 10-year treasury bill. So you need 2/3 of your capitalization just in money that requires no return, basically. So, where does that money exist? It doesn't exist in scale anywhere. That's why they're trying to raise this fund, which is a great idea. But ultimately, as a city, I think we need to attack this problem from all sides. But the scalable way to attack the problem where it doesn't actually cost anyone anything is by creating jobs in construction like we did. It didn't cost us, maybe it cost us $200,000 or $300,000 of setup costs on a $100 million project. That's not even, it's a rounding error. So, and then we were able to provide, I don't know, what have we graduated, 60 people now, more? We graduated over 60 apprentices into this program. The lowest paid jobs they're getting is probably, I don't know, I think $20 an hour now, maybe a little more with health insurance. So they're going to be able to afford making that kind of wage. It's only going to grow from there. That is how I think you can. So that cost us nothing to do. We probably have, just say 50 people representing 50 households. None of those people need capital A affordable housing anymore. It doesn't mean that they can necessarily afford to live in the building they're building, but in 3 or 4 years they certainly could if they didn't want to buy a home. This is a rental, so it's not one solution for all. And by the way, you've got affordable housing outside of the Philadelphia Department of Homeless Services, which serves emergency need housing. You have people that are permanently disabled, people that can't work. That's all affordable. And I, as the market, might not be able to solve that problem. But if we can shrink the opportunity gap or the inequity to the point where the 100 million gets to the people who can't be served with a sort of scalable private market-driven solution, that would be really ideal, in my opinion. Grow jobs.
Grow jobs.
Let me add to what Matt has said and what Charles has said. I mean, the actuality is when you're talking about affordable housing, people can't afford it. They can't afford it not because they don't want to afford it. They would love to afford it, but they don't have the economic wherewithal. There's not a comprehensive approach to having people being able to afford houses in the first place or anything else. And so, when I look at places like China that has launched a massive multi-year program to totally eliminate poverty because they feel they can do so, and they have done it. And I don't hear that coming from our community. I don't hear that coming from local, state, or federal government. And unless we move in those directions, we're going to be here 20 years from now talking about how can we do affordable housing. The people who live in neighborhoods want to be able to buy a house, to buy shoes, to drive a car like everyone else. But if they can't get a job, they can't be a part of the economy in that way, it's a joke. And that's why when we said to Matt, the first thing our people want to do is to have a job. We're tired of having developers come into our community and setting up fences around a project and seeing the cars with license plates from Delaware and New Jersey, and we're tired of hearing that the people who are doing skilled trades in the city, about 80 to 90% of them live in the suburbs. So even if the work is done, that's not going to accrue to the Philadelphia economy. So that's what we were concerned about. And we find a developer who understands that, and our people, we don't want a handout, we don't want a break. We want an opportunity to earn some money so we can pay for what we want. And when we found Matt, that's exactly what we're doing.
Laura, do we have an affordable housing crisis or a poverty crisis?
I don't love that question, actually, because I want to just reiterate, and I'll kind of get to that, there's a toolbox with many tools to address this broad equity issue. And there's the workforce component, and there's a huge poverty issue in the city of Philadelphia. 26%, I think, is our poverty rate. And then on the housing piece, it's a nuanced conversation, I think, for our community. The nation is facing issues around housing affordability, but even when we use in our industry, people throw around affordable housing, and that means so many things to so many people. And so just another few tools that were coming through my mind as we're having this conversation. The retrofit the accelerator fund is huge, because having more capital to do these projects, they're more expensive because they're complicated. There's a lot of components. It depends on what part of the market you're serving and what area of income you're trying to serve. You need rental assistance oftentimes to be coupled with the actual project itself, so that your residents can pay what you're looking for when the project's complete. But just a couple of other types of affordable housing development that address some of these other areas that are key when you talk about equity is, one, home ownership, and projects that can allow people in communities who have previously not been a part of the homeownership experience to do that is a huge way to kind of chip away at this issue that our industry created over the years. So affordable home ownership is often not something addressed, and there are some programs and some models that talk about that, and I think is really important. And then there's very low income housing that's critically important, but also for folks in some neighborhoods who do have jobs already and who are worried about prices increasing in those neighborhoods, ensuring that there's housing affordable to everyone living in that community, because that's what people care about. They want to be able to stay in their neighborhood. And so that's a whole other financing model. Sometimes the projects can serve all different income levels and be cross-subsidized, but it's just so much more complicated than, quote, do we have an affordable housing problem? And the other area that I want to make a plug for is existing housing and preservation of projects that today, or units, buildings, are affordable to that neighborhood and the residents there, but could be at risk of becoming unaffordable for people. Whether they're restricted or not is an interesting one. And in Philadelphia, we have a lot of small projects that are very hard to finance and do transactions because they're smaller deals, so the traditional lenders are uninterested. And in Philadelphia, we have a ton of units of housing that are smaller, owners that don't have the infrastructure, don't know how to use the low-income housing tax credit program, don't have those resources, and maybe don't think of themselves as affordable housing owners or developers, but are serving another really important population. And as neighborhoods change and prices change, those units are also an important part of the story, not just traditional HUD housing, new development. We're hoping that more people start to also think about what in housing world preservation, like small P preservation, keeping those units affordable and also keeping the quality of those units to the right level and all of the health and other benefits that has for those residents. So it's a complicated question.
So I wanted to jump up and scream when you said affordable home ownership, because that's one of the sort of fundamental ways people create wealth for their families and then pass that wealth to multiple generations. You know, we live in interesting times, and the last 2 years there's been a lot going on. And you know, when you think about where we are as a city and where we are as a country, you know, to me, every community needs there's a very basic set of needs every community needs. They need affordable housing, and in a lot of ways, affordable home ownership. They need properly funded educational resources. They need high quality, accessible health care. And they need quality educational resources. I mean, was it housing? Yeah. And the interesting thing that we have in Philadelphia, which I think is unique to us, is we're ground zero for cell and gene therapy. There are going to be just tons of jobs that are coming into the city globally. I mean, I think that, and so we have a really unique opportunity to, you know, you can look out 36, 60 months, and there are going to be projects that are going to be coming out of the ground with jobs that you can start training people for now with high school diplomas and so forth that could be tremendous. I mean, those are very strong living wage jobs. So we have, I mean, we do have a lot of issues as it relates to poverty, so, but we do have an opportunity to take advantage of these things that are happening in this market. And I think it's very unique to what we have. You know.
Well, what you're referring to is something that the healthcare professions have started to understand, and they call it the social determinants of health, SDOH. And they have broken it down in such a way that they're able to say, if you were born in these 5 zip codes, you are going to have poor health.
And it's worthwhile. It's worth it.
If you have gone to these schools, you're going to have poor health. And this social determinants of health, I think, is interesting, but there are more fundamental issues having to do with poor health, like lack of appropriate concern by the people in the medical profession themselves, the complicit and implicit bias that happens among healthcare professionals. So when they see a person of color walk in, all of this is the same problem that we're having in healthcare. And we need to understand that you can't just say that this is happening with developers and contractors. This is the problem that's happening throughout our country. And you're going to find partners in the healthcare profession who want to talk about exactly what you want to talk about.
No, the healthcare, I mean, I'm involved with something down in Southwest Philadelphia where Greater Philadelphia Health Action is funding an early childhood learning facility because they realize that exposing children and getting children into a quality educational pipeline reduces the healthcare liability.
Sure.
The hospitals, the insurance companies, all these humongous institutions, it's in their interest to start looking at, you know, food sovereignty, food security, housing, education. All those things are social determinants to community well-being in a holistic and general way.
Absolutely.
I'll just pile onto that. I'm so glad you brought up the social determinants of health issue, because that's also an area where communities have specifically been disproportionately impacted. There's environmental justice issues, and it also ties to this housing quality issue. You can see the data in like mold and heat, and all of those health areas impact individual health outcomes. And like you said, funding is going into all these areas that we're talking about. Housing is being funded by some large Medicaid and healthcare institutions for this problem. It's cheaper to help repair an existing structure than send someone to the emergency room. And these things are being discussed at a high policy level, and it's super exciting to see our city start to tap into that and try to be really creative with how we finance this work, because it's hard and it's expensive.
It would be even cheaper for the city to just condemn every toxic waste junkyard in Southwest and North Philadelphia. That'd be really cheap compared to the ongoing cost of healthcare. To your point about this article, I mean, we've gotten a political class that is invested in like the sort of what I would call the poverty industrial complex, and like the point you brought up about like how is it that there are these like this tire fire that just happens, outrageous. Like if that happened on near any of our homes, you can bet one of us would be at the person's house who owned that junkyard, throwing tires in their front yard, seeing how they like that. So in all seriousness, the city is really sort of not doing anything to fix some of the low-hanging fruit. Another example is the Department of Homeless Services. They pay $100 million a year to effectively rent, I think, 5,000 apartments, like the equivalent of 5,000 monthly rentals. You want to talk about where a dime goes to become a penny. There's another example. So just there are some very easy things that are fixable to close, the environmental determinants of health, environmental health. What is it called? DOA.
Social determinants of health.
Social determinants of environmental health. I've been aware of the concept for a while. It's like there are ways within just policy, like the planning department with the stroke of a pen could eliminate that problem.